Uh, Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday Morning Mastermind. I'm your host, Samantha Studebaker Carl. And today I'm here with my good friends Dan and Catherine, and we are talking about the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And we're on chapter 7. Woo! And it's windy out here this morning, which is nice because it's nice and warm, but I'm happy to be able to be outside again because that's my favorite place to be when the weather is beautiful. And so anyway, before we get started, I want to give my friends an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we can start talking about Chapter 7 of Atomic Habits.
Hello, this is Catherine Clement in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay. This is Dan Sisek in Las Vegas, Nevada, where we've been having weird weather. We've been actually cool during May, and it's warming up a little bit, but we're not anywhere near our 90-degree or 100-degree weather that we normally get in May. So this is kind of weird, but ready to talk about this next chapter and get going.
Awesome, awesome. So this chapter talks about like the secret to self-control, which I'll be honest, I didn't have a chance to read this whole chapter because I was busy doing other things, and so anyway, I'm hoping that you guys read it so that we can go through it. But I started this morning reading through this first page or two, where it was talking about how in 1971 during the Vietnam War. Um, they discovered that like 15% of soldiers were addicted to heroin. And of course, the government was freaking out about that because that was pretty significant. And but then once they brought all those soldiers home, only a very small percentage of them actually became re-addicted within a year. And so that was a pretty big deal, where they were like, well, what the heck, how is it that they were how was it so easy for them to get unaddicted to this drug that is apparently so addictive and has caused so many people problems throughout our culture and other cultures. And so they were recognizing that it was just this big radical change in the environment. And that was how far I got in the chapter. So I'm hoping Dan or Catherine, you could pick that up and go a little bit further with it. But I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy that so many can be addicted and then almost instantaneously quit. Now I don't know if they gave them any kind of counteractive drugs or something to help wean them off of it. I have no idea how to get that far. So do you guys read? Please tell me you did.
Yes, I did. I read it
If not,
last
we'll just
night,
read it,
and it was a whole whopping. It was a whole whopping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, and I read it last night. I'm like, this is it. This is all there is. But it was again another chapter filled with a lot of information, um, and what they were alluding to is the fact that because they had done other surveys and stuff and things like that, whereas it always seemed that it was you know people would go and they get cleaned up or whatever, and and this goes back to what we were talking about in the last chapter about environment and stuff and having an impact. They said that a lot of people, when you get cleaned up and stuff for drug users and people with addictions, you get removed out of the environment that tends to activate the cues that make you want to. That goes back into, like you were talking about, the smoking and stuff and things like that. In the book, it talked about one lady where when she would smoke, but the only time she smoked was when she would go horse riding with a friend. So, and then her and a friend kind of lost track, and she didn't do the horse riding for uh, quite a number of years. And then she went out horse ride one time, and all of a sudden that desire to have a cigarette was there. And I, after reading this chapter, it was interesting. I'm like, oh wow, okay, because it's like it was talking about uh, that in this study with the Vietnam veterans, that, like I said, 5% of them, when they returned home, became re-addicted within a year. Now what's interesting is the next part, and said just 12% within 3 years. So the fact that 5% were re-addicted in a year, but in 3 years it went up. So it seems like also the length of time you're in that environment can also extend, add to the cue and the stuff of, you becoming more addicted, or reigniting those cues. But it was just the part that I got was just that, in reading through it, you know, of how they looked at this and then looked at typical drug users. Going back to what I said before, they get taken out, they go to a drug rehabilitation, they remove all the cues, all the things that, and they seem clean. But then they go back home and they start doing this and hanging out and doing this with all the friends and people, and all of a sudden those cues are right back there, and it draws them right back in, and that's why you have a high um, thing of people getting re-addicted. And then as they do it more and more and more, it seems like the um, habit gets more entrenched. And I also talked about that um, habits, they don't really ever go away, so to speak. They tend to go dormant outside of the environment that they're in, that help causes the cues to come up and uh, cause it to trigger the habit, and therefore the habit kicks in. It's just automatic. Um, so that's what I got.
Yeah, basically, this chapter talked about how most people feel like it's willpower that determines habits. The ability to break habits is willpower, and that gets drilled into a lot of people. Well, if you really wanted to quit, you could quit. Blah blah blah. Um, but what this showed and what the military example proved was that it is really more environment than willpower. And like Dan said, once a habit is set, it's set. And it's interesting because it said that the people that were able to use willpower to not do something were people that didn't really have much of a problem with it anyway, or didn't have like addictive personalities, because there are certainly some personalities that are, quote, more addictive than others. Some people have no issues putting down things, probably because they never allowed the pattern to establish an imprint in the first place. Um, but once it's imprinted, then it's very, very difficult to just use willpower. And I can absolutely guarantee you that if I went and bought a pack of cigarettes and I had it within my reach, I would smoke. There's no way I could use my willpower to not smoke if I had cigarettes here. I am able to use my willpower to not allow myself to buy the cigarettes. So that's, to me, that's environment. Again, that's reinforcing that that's environment, because if they were in my environment, I would I would have them. And I don't go to places where they are in the environment specifically for that reason. I don't hang around people that smoke. I don't go to bars where there might be smoking. Um, I don't drink, so I don't go to bars anyway. But I just don't go to places where I'm exposed to it, because I know it's an issue for me, and my willpower is only so strong, and that's basically what this talked about. Is if you're beating yourself up because, and I'm just going to use food as an example here, because I think more people have issues with food than anything else probably. um, you're beating yourself up because you can't lose weight, because you can't stop overeating or whatever. It's really don't beat yourself up, because there's not many people that have that willpower. It's an environmental issue. You have to stop buying the things that you're eating so that they're not in your environment, so that you're not tempted and you don't have to use your willpower. It's just not there. You have to buy other things that you can eat as much as you want of it, and it's not going to put the weight on you because it's a healthier food choice. Um, and just because we're on that subject, keep in mind, if you're beating yourself up over not being able to stop eating a particular food, keep in mind that the companies that make a lot of these foods, unless it's God made, like a piece of fruit or something, they put additives in the foods that make them addictive, just like cigarettes have additives in them that make them addictive. So it's not all your fault, like, don't beat yourself up over too much, because it gets into this vicious cycle where you beat yourself up and then you feel bad about yourself and then you reach out for comfort food, and it's just like this vicious cycle. So first of all, realize that, there may be, first of all, it's not up to willpower. Secondly, there may be extenuating circumstances like addictive substances that are in there that you're fighting against too. Um, so just change your environment as much as you can. And we can go back to the last chapter. I think it was the last chapter, or maybe the one before, where they talked about habit stacking. If you're trying to build a new habit, just do it after a habit that you already have established, say like brushing your teeth or whatever, and then instigate your new habit to help reinforce that. But it is the reason that the military was able to stop is because they went from their horrendously stressful environment to a somewhat less stressful environment, because I know a lot of them have trouble after they come home, so I'm not diminishing that. But they didn't have access to it anymore. Well, they could have had access, but it wasn't like it was there. They weren't surrounded by the horror that they were there, so they weren't pushed as hard. Whereas drug addicts, it's kind of the reverse. They go to a rehab center where there's no access, so it's easy for them to stay off. But then they go home, they're surrounded by friends and all of the same circumstances that they were in before, and so they go right back to it, and that's why they relapse so easily. And some people choose, if they're trying to stop drugs or something, to just go to an entirely new environment, and sometimes that helps. However, you can always find drugs somewhere if you want to, because they're everywhere. And sometimes for some personalities, being in a brand new environment is so much more stressful that it like pushes them to get stressed out and want to use. So it really is a catch-22. And I would just remind everybody that, going back to the book, I forget what it is, what you say to yourself, the things that you say to yourself, whatever. It is those things that we say to ourselves that typically stress us out to the point where we want to use whatever it is we're trying to get away from. So watch your thoughts and what you're saying to yourself, and quit lying to yourself about a lot of shit, and you won't be so stressed out.
I
Yeah,
was
it's
going to jump
what you
out
say when you talk to yourself by Shad Helmstetter. That book, I love that book, and but yeah, I wanted to just jump out for a moment on the what you were talking about with the food issues, because I have issues with some kinds of food. And if I don't buy them at the grocery store and they're not in the house, obviously I'm less likely to eat them, and I'm less likely to just be like, oh, I'm going to leave right now and go to the store and grab this one thing so I can eat it. That's like a big production to make that happen. However, I do have, one thing is with ice cream. I really love ice cream. And now we're like a block away from a Dairy Queen. So I'm like, I won't buy it at the store, but then it's just 2 minutes away, and then so it's harder than it was when it was, 10 minutes away, And it's so silly though, but it all comes down to what you say when you're talking to yourself about it, because I'll have this thought that'll pop into my head. Ooh, ice cream. It sounds so good. I love ice cream. And then I'll have this string of thoughts all about ice cream, And then the next thing you know, I'm like talking to my husband, hey, do you want to go get me some ice cream, or should we go get some ice cream? It's this big thing with ice cream. And I'm realizing I just need to start telling myself something completely different. I don't know what. I have to come up with a number of things to just, read some notes or something on my phone that will trigger different thoughts. And even if it's, oh, I have to go do laundry, or I don't even know. I'm not sure. I have to come up with something to try and combat that. Although I may start it and then my mind will be like, do you really want to stop eating ice cream because you love ice cream? Okay, go ahead, Dan. Sorry, I just wanted to jump out there really quick.
No, no, that was some great points because I think we all have those kryptonite issues, I'll call them. Because, like me, I've said it time and time again. Mountain Dew's been my kryptonite for years and years. But I also, in reading this chapter, realized that, oh, well, if I have it in my house, if I constantly go and get it, or in part of my morning habitual routine, I stop at the convenience store, fill up my drink thing that I take, and take it to work, and I have it sitting in front of me all day. Wonder why I have the habit. I've helped feed that habit, and sometimes habits that we think are okay when we first, like when Mountain Dew first came out, it was different, it was new. I wanted to try it. I liked it, and that's kind of where, oh, I want to drink that some more, and that's kind of where it came from, and then it became the thing that it is today. Now it's been interesting because when I got sick the last time I got sick, for some odd reason, I had no desire to drink Mountain Dew. It was really weird. It was really weird. And so I've not been drinking it as much. I've been replacing it with some other types of, not so great drinks like other sodas, but at least I've changed that part of it. But this chapter really helped me understand that um, environment. And it said the other thing it noted was people who seem to have tremendous willpower, a lot of times, like you were alluding to, Catherine, is it's not so much they have great willpower, they just don't put themselves or don't allow themselves into those instant e- environments to where it can happen. So, like for me, maybe if I really want to cut down, don't buy it when I go to a store. Just make a conscious note. Don't buy it. Maybe turn around and instead buy water, and then maybe if I have water around, instead of I'll start drinking more water or something like that. It's that, but it's going to take that constant working on it and talking to myself. I go back to the book. What what do you say to yourself when you talk to yourself? The reasons why, and understanding and looking at this chapter. But this chapter and the last chapter go hand in hand. The environment really can play a big part. And like it said in the last chapter, we can design our environment, but if we understand some of the things that are the things that we want to make the changes in our environment, then we know how to structure what we want to change in our environment to be more conducive for the changes we want and to change the habits we want to change. And I think that's what is so great about this book is as you go through each chapter, it kind of gives you step by step. It's like, oh, never thought of that, never looked at it that way, you know, and it breaks it down to core things that out there in the real world you don't really see, and you get bombarded. And society also, as you were talking about, Catherine, bombards us with like, what do we see in TVs or in movies or in stuff a lot when especially women get a broken heart? What do they show in the movie? They're sitting with their best friend, or they're sitting watching in front of the TV to other heartbreak movies or TV shows with a big thing of ice cream. So that also builds in that mindset of, oh, this is what you do when you do that, rather than finding more constructive and prudent ways of dealing with it, you know, And because guys, we have our ways of how we deal with me. I go and take a tennis ball and go hit the hell out of a tennis ball against a wall or something, or things. We all have our ways of how we deal with things, but are they really conducive to what we really want to do? And so I think society also, going back to what Catherine was saying, throws a lot at us to help set up those things that we think are what life is. But if we go down to it, in a lot of ways, uh, between like me and my faith, I have a lot of control on how I can structure the parts of my life I want. And it's realizing those things and being able to structure it the way I want it to best allow me to be my best self.
Yeah, I I think we've touched on this before, the whole, ideas that they kind of portray in, in television shows and movies and that sort of thing. And that's so true, with the ice cream thing. I mean, you always see that, there's a breakup and then she's eating ice cream. That's never really been my thing with ice cream. I have like a whole different thought process on ice cream. Ice cream for me is totally just, I love ice cream. And it's funny because I didn't used to be that way. It was something, my grandmother, a number of years ago, she's passed on, and but a number of years ago, she told me at one point that ice cream was like her favorite thing, and she would indulge in ice cream, every so often. Of course, she had control over it. She would eat like 2 bites of ice cream, and that was her indulgence, and that made her perfectly happy. And but she passed on, and for whatever reason in my mind, not even right after she passed, but years later, it's there's like something in my mind that, I don't know, kind of like ice cream is like a memory of her. And so there's that little connection of thinking about ice cream, thinking that she loved ice cream, and she's my grandma and I love her, and so ice cream, it's like this happy thought thing. And um and so when I think about it, it's a happy thought, and so then I'm all happy about it, right? So, but then at the same time, I can see how, TV and the media are, they're perpetuating the whole alcoholism issue. It's like every time something happens on TV or on the movies and somebody's stressed, somebody's upset, they're facing a decision, they're this, they're that, all of these things that, are whatever, whether they're happy, they're sad, they're whatever, they're taking a drink. It's like, here, I gotta drink some wine because we're happy. I've got to drink some wine because I'm sad. Let's sit in the office and drink alcohol. And it's funny because, I was watching a while back, I was watching the movie Mad Men, where they were drinking and smoking in the office. And I'm like, and that's how it used to be. But they stopped portraying smoking so much in TV shows because it's become taboo, if you will. But drinking is still huge. And then even in a lot of movies now, they're portraying more and more smoking marijuana. Because why? Because it's starting to become more mainstream than what it used to be. And so then they're talking about that. And so it's just interesting because it's not just those things, it's other behaviors as well. It's like I notice a lot in television shows how dramatic they are in these when things happen. Like they're teaching people how to behave when when whatever happens. They have a fender bender with somebody out on the road, and they're teaching people how to act like crazy people when that happens, when in reality it's like, oh, I had a fender bender, is everybody okay? Yeah, okay, I'm okay. If you come across somebody who is not programmed by television, then you can just walk away from that like it's no big deal. But someone who's programmed by TV, and that's like the end of the world. So not that I've had a fender bender in like since I was a teenager, but just an example. Um, okay, I'm done for the moment. And I was going to touch on. Oh, I know what I was going to touch on. Dan, you mentioned the whole Mountain Dew thing, and I used to drink a lot of Mountain Dew way back when, also. And but it was funny because with me, it wasn't just Mountain Dew. It was like Mountain Dew was a cue to have a candy bar, And a candy bar, after I was finished my candy bar and having a drink of Mountain Dew, that was a cue to have another cigarette. So it was like this, three whammies all in one kind of a thing. And every time I'd pick up a Mountain Dew, I'd be sitting here going, gosh, where's my candy bar? And but thankfully I was able to stop drinking that. And but Catherine, you mentioned earlier about how some people it's harder for them to get off of an addiction or out of a bad habit than it is for other people. And I can attest to that. And it depends on the things that they are. It's like with me, I'm sitting here thinking, ice cream is a happy thought and it's a good thing and la 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 la. I talk to myself all day long about why it's so good to have ice cream in my life, and it's the same thing with coffee. I love coffee. And I know in a previous couple of um hangouts back, I was talking about maybe trying to quit coffee. And then I told myself, why do I want to quit coffee? I love coffee. So it's funny that that happens, but yet at the same time, years ago when I quit cigarettes, my husband was still smoking, but when I quit, I was like I had a pack of cigarettes and I'd be in the car and driving the car, that was a trigger. So I'm like, all right, I'm done with these, and I threw them out the window. And of course, I know that was polluting at the time, throwing trash out of my car. I shouldn't have done that, but at the time it needed to be a drastic measure, and so that was what I did. And for me, I was able to stop that day, and that happened to me a couple of times over the years where I just would just quit. I was done, I would quit, and I'd stop, and I would not smoke for years, and then all of a sudden, some little thing would trigger it, and it wouldn't necessarily be because I was in the environment with somebody smoking, because of course my husband continuously smoked. He's never not smoked, and so it wasn't that, but it was some other random thing, some thought that would come into my head, and then it would start this like whole thought process thing. And I think they mentioned, I was kind of just like scanning through this chapter, and I thought that they mentioned something about like mental grooves of habit. Yeah, being carved into your brain, they're nearly impossible to entirely remove, even if they go unused for a while. And that's kind of interesting because, that happened to me multiple times over the years when I was working on completely stopping with the smoking thing. If something would come up and it would trigger some kind of a thought process, and then I would end up in this whole, uh, thought stream, if you would, about, smoking, and I'd pick up a cigarette again, and then I'd smoke for a year, and it would be like I had never even stopped. It was crazy. And then, I would hit like I don't know, a wall in my mind or something that where I would just be like, this is ridiculous. And then I would start on this other thought process that would get me to stop again. And then eventually I just was focused more on this other thought process of, all the reasons why I don't want to smoke. And I've been able to not pick cigarettes up for a lot of years now. So um anyway, that's all for now.
Going on along that thought, I thought it was interesting how in the book it talks about, you know, well, it talks about the, habit you were talking about, smoking, but it talked in here, and I read about it. Um, oh, like bad habits are autocatalytic. They process feeds itself. They foster the feelings they try to numb. And this goes back to what you were saying, Catherine. You feel bad, so you eat junk food. Because you eat junk food, you feel bad watching. This is one for me. Watching television makes you feel sluggish. And so what do I do when I feel sluggish when, a lot of time when I'm in my mind thinking, well, if I turn it off and get up, I can go get this done, go get that, go that. But then I, get into my thought process. This is kind of, where I'm leading, where it says, so you watch more television because you don't have the energy to do anything else. And that's what I say to myself. I'm like, I'm already here. I'm already sitting down. Don't have the energy. I worked really hard today at work. I went and Ubered after work for a little while. I deserve to just sit here and be sluggish. But in reality, I'm looking around my house. I'm like, okay, I need to get this done. I want to get that done. I need to get that done. I'd like to do this, spend more time working on my blogging and stuff, and but what do? I sit there and watch TV and play this game. I love the game, but I'm realizing how much it is a distraction. It's a bubble shooter, and I sit there and I pop bubbles, which is very cathartic for me because it lets me just tune out the world, and I'm just popping these bubbles. Like, okay, I want to pop that person and pop that person, kind of thing. But I'm realizing how much time it's taking me away from other things too. So now it's opening this this book is making me open my eyes. So okay, when I do that, when I do that, when I do this, are they really conducive to the type of thoughts of things I want to do and how I want to be, and to make the changes in my own home, or do the things I want to get done in my own home, or keep up on normal everyday things and stuff like that, and to help foster changes I want to make in eating habits and stuff like that. So it's interesting how, you know, like like we've said, the encoding that's been put there by me, and habits and time and life, and living life as long as I've lived. It's like, you know, there, and I'm picturing in my head, like a big uh album, a big old phonograph album. You put it on with the grooves for the songs and everything, how embedded those grooves are and stuff, or like grooves on a tire, that you have. It's like they're really engraved in there, and it's like, in order to make those changes, I gotta either put new tires on, which have new grooves, in the essence of that thought process, trying to make the analogy to where I can change those grooves. And but at the same time, the thought of it is like, that's a lot of work. Just being honest.
Well, I think that sometimes, I mean, there are some things that are so addictive and so unhealthy, like smoking, that you just, like, moderation is not an option. But then there are some things where moderation is an option, like ice cream, like coffee, you know. Yes, if you ate tons and tons and tons of ice cream, I guess it could lead to obesity and diabetes and different things like that. But I mean, seriously, just having a little bit of ice cream, maybe you don't need to have it every night. Maybe you could have it twice a week, or, something like that. Like, I have coffee every day, but I only allow myself. Now, when I say this, my cup is really not a cup. It's more probably like 2.5 cups or something, because it's like a travel mug. No, it's not that big. It's not that big either. But it is more than a cup. But I do limit myself to one a day. And quite honestly, driving for Uber 12 hours a day, I could be sucking that stuff down all day long. So that's really not bad, considering, how bad it could be, that I limit myself to one a day. So I think we have to be realistic with ourselves too, and not just beat ourselves up for, oh, I shouldn't do this and I shouldn't do that. Because, I mean, look at us, guys. We're really boring people. Like, we don't do shit. All we do is like self improvement all the damn time, right? And constantly monitor our thoughts and constantly be good people. And I mean, on the scope of things, our little minor ice cream events are not that big of a deal. Okay. So I think that we have to be realistic about it, and realize that some things can be, that moderation is fine. Other things, absolutely not. If I let myself have one cigarette, I would be back to a pack a day, just like I never quit. It doesn't matter. I quit for 20 years one time. I went back. It only takes one cigarette. So I know that that is an absolute no no. I cannot do it. But other things that I'm trying to cut back on or whatever, moderation is fine. And in the grand scheme of things, with everything that everybody's addicted to, having a cup of coffee a day is not the worst thing in the world, even though I do use hazelnut creamer, which has titanium dioxide in it, which is probably killing me. but I don't think about that part. So the other thing, which we've mentioned multiple times before, but I think it's important, and I don't, I mean, I could be wrong because obviously, these AA programs keep a lot of people sober, but I just don't think it's good to claim, like I claim I am not a smoker. I don't tell myself I'm a smoker every day. If I told myself I was a smoker every day, I'd be smoking. I guarantee it. Like I have to tell myself I do not smoke. And so I don't know how they get away with telling themselves they're alcoholics and stay away from it. I really don't. But personally, I find, you know, I have to tell myself what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. I do not claim to be a smoker. I claim to be a non-smoker, and that helps me when I'm really struggling and fighting those. And just yesterday, I was fighting it. I was so stressed out yesterday, and I just wanted to stop and buy a pack. I was just like, nope, you're not a smoker. Can't do it. It's just not going to happen. And really, it's it's I had to push the thoughts of being stressed out of my mind is how I had to handle that. Because it would have been very, very easy to pull into a 7-Eleven and grab a pack, or to compromise and grab a vaporizer, which is something that's super popular around here. All the college kids and everybody's using these. I forget what they're called, but they're these little vaporizer things, and they're just really popular right now. And I've had that conversation in my head. Well, if you're vaping, then that's not as bad as smoking. But then I had to remind myself, we really don't know the health effects of vaping, because there's been some, studies come out that say vaping is not good for you either, and that it causes lung damage as well. And some of the chemicals that they're putting in the vaping solutions and things are not healthy. So far I've been able to, keep myself from even going back to vaping, which I used vaping to stop smoking cigarettes. So I did feel like at that time it was a healthier choice. Now I'm not so sure, but I had to change the thoughts in my head about being as stressed out as I was. And I want to share that I'm reading another book. It's a very good book, uh, focusing primarily on PTSD. But even if you don't have PTSD, I think it's a great book to read, and it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And one of the things that it talks about in that book, which I have found helpful, is, we many of us remember the movie Sybil, which was about a lady with multiple personalities. Well, I guess there are people that, that it is that pronounced, that there's multiple personalities, and one just kind of comes out and takes over for the other in a very dynamic way and things like that. But on a more subtle level, we all have multiple personalities. We all have personalities that maybe experience a trauma in childhood. And it doesn't have to be, something like child abuse, sexual abuse, something like that. It could be, for one child, it could be divorce. For one child, it could be losing a dog. It could be so many things. And maybe it wouldn't traumatize somebody else, but it did traumatize that person. And then that personality gets stuck at that age. And then there's like this other personality that kind of comes in and sort of takes over for them or protects them, gets very, that maybe that's the leader personality. And each and every one of us has all of these different personalities inside of us. How much we let them come out and play is another thing. But we all have them. And so I found it helpful for me because I have sometimes very conflicting thoughts. Like I have this one part of me that is totally a monk, Zen, you can't touch that person. And then I have this other person that could freaking rip your head off in a heartbeat and have no remorse. And I've struggled with this. Like, how can I be so opposite at times? And where does that mean thing person come from? And this book, even though I kind of knew some of this before, it just sort of helps solidify that, when you're feeling like yesterday, when I was so stressed, I had to have a talk with myself and say, okay, there's a part of me that is so stressed out. Or like some days, I've just had it and I'm in so much pain again. I'm just ready to, I've just had it. I'm like tired. And, and then I have to say, there's a part of me that is so fed up right now. Instead of I am fed up. Do you see the difference there? There's a part of me that could rip that person's head off right now. But it's not me as a whole. And I think it's important to make that distinction. And I think when it comes to being addicted to things or having bad habits, we can also use that same line of reasoning. There's a part of me that's addicted to smoking. There's a part of me that really needs this or that or the other. But then it allows some space for all those other parts to kind of come in and help out. You see what I'm saying? So even though that's a very slight distinction, it still helps put that little bit of space there to where I don't beat myself up for being that horrible person that wants to rip that person's head off, right? Because it's just a piece of me that wants to do that. It's not really me. It's that protector person that came in to keep me alive through some very traumatic experiences, that is looking out for my health and well-being, that has the strength to stand up for herself when the rest of Catherine doesn't. It's that person. And that person actually turns out to be a pretty cool person. You know, maybe wanting to rip somebody's head off is a bad thought, but when you consider why they're doing it and how that person came about to begin with, that personality, that's a wonderful person that's there to care for someone that couldn't care for themselves at the time. And that stops that berating cycle that I can get into sometimes with myself when I'm acting or thinking inappropriately in my own mind. And again, it comes back to, it's all in our mind, and how do we control that. And changing the environment in our mind is as important as changing our physical environment.
Wow, I kind of understand what you were talking about there, Catherine, because I'm like you. I believe that we all have little parts of ourselves, that different parts that kind of come out, and um, I call it wearing a different hat, and things like that. But I kind of get that, and but kind of taking this back to, because I think this kind of helps. It says researchers refer. It's going over some stuff above this, but um, I'm talking about something more with habits. But it kind of, I think, how this can kind of cue in certain parts of our personalities coming out too. Says researchers refer to this phenomenon as cue-induced wanting. All external triggers cause a compulsive craving to repeat a bad habit. Once you notice something, you begin to want it. This process is happening all the time, often without us realizing. Scientists have found that showing addicts a picture of cocaine for just 33 milliseconds, however long I don't think I can think how fast that is, because that's even shorter than a second. Um, 33 milliseconds. stimulates the reward pathway in the brain and sparks desire. How often have we been in stressful situations or something, and something flashes up or something comes up or triggers, and all of a sudden we go into that mode of we want this, or like in your case, something triggered something else. So it triggered that part of you that just wants to rip that person's head off. I've been there. I've had one little thing, and I don't even know what that one little thing is that triggered me, but all of a sudden I'm super upset and mad or whatever, or I'm all of a sudden desiring, oh, I need to, because I'm stressed out, I need to drink some more Mountain Dew or this or that. It's funny how the little triggers really are so there, as we've talked about before, that, once it's encoded, it's encoded. It's just learning how to overwrite. But um, I just never realized how fast a trigger can really trigger in me, and I've switched from being perfectly fine, and all of a sudden I'm really needing some more Mountain Dew, or I'm really needing this because something at work, just really, or my boss or this or whatever. I'm just like, I just need something to calm my nerves, and so I'll reach and drink my Mount. And for some odd reason, that calms my nerves, or I can kind of refocus and go back to. But um, I think we all have those little things that, some are good, like Samantha with the ice cream. Oh, ice cream, my grandmother. Oh, that's, I have my thoughts of my grandmother and certain things that, um, for me, when I'm feeling really down, somehow I'll turn my thoughts to my grandmother, and it makes me feel better, So it's just interesting how this chapter has kind of wound around and gotten us all through all different, covered different things. But it's, I think, once again, going back to this book, going along with the Slight Edge, they really, I say that every time we get on here, but I really do think that. So, but I just wanted to, say I understand what you were getting at, Catherine, and believe me, I know the feeling.
Yeah, this has been a really great chapter. So it's helped us touch on a lot of different things, and I feel like we haven't even really touched on everything they were talking about. I mean, we kind of have. Um, he's talking about how this chapter is kind of like the inversion of the first law of behavior change, and that one was make it obvious. If you want to make a change, make that thing obvious in your life so it's easy to not, forget about it. And this one is saying, for this particular chapter, it says make it invisible. So to remove as many of the cues as possible. So some of his suggestions on here was, if you can't get any work done, leave your phone in another room. If you're continually feeling like you're not enough, stop following social media accounts that trigger jealousy and envy. If you're wasting too much time watching TV, move the TV out of the bedroom. If you're spending too much time on electronics, quit reading reviews of each latest tech gear. If you're playing too many video games, unplug the console and put it in the closet after each use. It was interesting. One of these kind of triggered something that I was started doing recently, and I noticed that I was going to the store for different things that weren't on my grocery list, and I realized it was because I kept getting emails related to these things, or I would end up on Amazon more than I needed to be because I would get an email in my notifications about, hey, you got to check this thing out on Amazon, or you've got to go shopping at the Kroger because this is on sale, or you got to go, oh, check this out. Joanne Fabrics is having a 25% off sale. I realized that I would have never even thought about most of these things if I wasn't getting these freaking notifications on my phone about it. And so I started going through my email where I was just, the email that I have that I always put in when I'm at the store or wherever I am, it's that one email. And I just went through and unsubscribed from all of these different stores like Burlington Coat Factory and Joanne Fabrics and Ollie's and, just all these things that it's not even places that I generally shop. It's just I went there one time, found something, it was cool, got on their email list, and then now I keep getting all these messages, and I end up shopping those stores more than I ever would have. And, which I'm sure that's great for retail, but, for me, on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, I just need to unsubscribe from these so I'm not getting these notifications, because I was getting notifications from like Pop John's Pizza all the time. They're like, ooh, you're only 2 points away from a free pizza, and I'd be like, ooh, cool, I just order some, and and it just it just kind of popped up into my head, and it made me realize, wait a second, these aren't thoughts that are coming into my own head. They're being put there by all these email notifications and reminders and this and that and the other. And I'm like, I just need to get off those lists. And then I would be less likely to spend money at those places, just randomly. And yeah, exactly, Dan. I see you're posting on here. That's why they ask you for your email. Heck yeah, it is. I know. Well, at the retail store I work at, they're constantly at. That's like one of the things we do in our checkout process is get the person's email. And the first thing we do is get their phone number, and the second one is get their email. And it's the same thing. So it's just that's a huge thing right there. Is just to realize that the more things that are popping up in your environment of whatever it happens to be, the more you could get those out of your mind, the less likely you are going to be to, have the cue that causes you to go in the direction you don't want to go. And one of my I'm not even a big shopper. I don't like to shop. I don't like to go to the store. It's not my favorite thing to do. And yet, because all these little notifications kept popping up on my phone, I was going there much more than I have ever gone to any stores or shopped or whatever. And so I started eliminating those. So that's kind of a, you are not a true woman, LOL, just teasing. That's funny, Dan. Yeah. I don't think all women are shoppers. I think that's a big major stereotype, because I've never been a big shopper. So, and I know there's a lot of women that are not. So, and I know a lot of men, working in retail, it has boggled my mind how many men are big on shopping. It just is like, wow, okay, that's surprising. Yeah, I was gonna say probably you weren't either, Catherine. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that you're not. I just, yeah. Or is that you that said that, or Jan? Sorry, it popped up over both of you, but either way. Um, I know we're at the top of the hour. We need to wrap up for today, guys. Any final thoughts before we do?
I'll jump out really quick. Um, just on the chapter summary, like you were going out a little before that, it says the inversion of the first law of behavior change is make it invisible, which you basically have said. Once a habit is formed, we've already gone over this, and I think we beat it to. It is unlikely to be forgotten. This is a part that where we kind of touched on it, but I think it really needs to be emphasized is people with high self-control tend to spend less time in tempting situations. It's easier to avoid temptation than to resist it. And I think Catherine made a good point of that as we touched on it. You know, if you don't want to start a habit, if there's one that you see forming, cut it, nip it in the bud there, cut it off and don't put yourself or don't, allow those um, temptations to have a major factor and play and get rid of them and that way you won't have the cues that get embedded to where the habit and the situations arise. And then one of the most practical ways to eliminate a bad habit is to reduce exposure to the cue that caused it. And then self-control is short-term strategy, not a long-term one. And I've never thought it. I always thought it was a long-term thing, but after this chapter, I realized that it's really not a powerful way to go. It's more of the way of um, going back to what we said. What you say to yourself, that's the biggest powerful thing, I think. And then reducing and getting rid of the things out there that you don't want, make them invisible, don't make them be the cue that they are, and put more cues in that are the things that you want to build the habits that you do want.
Great chapter. My final thought is that my heart, and I'm sure everybody on the panel's heart, goes out to all those who've lost those defending our freedom, this Memorial Day weekend. We appreciate your sacrifice, and just send love out to everybody. Stay safe. See you next week.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Catherine. This is a glorious weekend here in Indianapolis, or for the Memorial Day weekend. Of course, this is a big weekend for Indy with the Indy 500 and Memorial Day celebrate, or not celebrations, but events that they have going on around Indianapolis. So, and I'm sure they have those going around out there as well, wherever you are. And for those of you in the world who have lost family members, then we obviously, our heart goes out to you. And we are very, very thankful for those who have made those sacrifices, so that we can continue to have our freedoms. And yeah, I was watching a show the other day, and they were talking about, some countries that don't have the freedom to even do what we're doing right here, right now, which is have free speech. And and I'm just very thankful that we have that here. So that's a big thing for us, I know. So with that, guys, have a great, awesome, amazing weekend. I hope you all enjoy your lovely long weekend, and we'll see you next time on the Saturday Morning Mastermind. Bye for now.